So think about your student's school day. They arrive at school, they get off the bus, they're greeted by an adult in the hallway, they're getting things from their locker, they're walking across the building to their first period class. They sit down, there's whole group instruction, maybe some directions are given about due dates that are coming up, about where to turn in homework that's due, about the group work that they're going to be doing in 10 minutes. So there's all these environments and tasks that the student is encountering throughout their school day. And the point of the IEP team discussing accommodations and modifications to put in the IEP is to predict in those environments and with those tasks, what are the barriers that the student is going to encounter that are coming from their disability? And how can we diminish and remove those barriers so that the student can successfully participate in those environments with those tasks? So when it comes to actually writing them in the IEP, the bottom line is clarity. And that comes down to absolute terms about what we're doing as far as the accommodations and modifications, and then the what, when, where, and the who about who is responsible for the accommodations and modifications. Have you ever ended a meeting, maybe a PLC meeting, and there were action items, but it wasn't clear when they were supposed to be done or who is supposed to be responsible for them? What is the likelihood that they're actually going to happen? Very low. If we just say, this is going to happen, but we don't say when or who. So with accommodations and modifications, we need to write out, this person will do it. This is when they will do it. And that makes it a lot more likely that the school will carry out the accommodations because everything is clear. Before we move on, accommodations and modifications have a very close relationship to behavior support plans. A behavior support plan, or a BSP, for students with behavior needs is a branch off of the IEP. It's an extension legally of the IEP. So it's effectively the same thing. And it's primarily just accommodations around behavior. That's all that it essentially is. There's one or two extra pieces, but the bulk of it is just accommodations about behavior. So for students with those behavior needs, it's recommended to just have a BSP running, just fold it into their IEP. And that's where you would put the behavior accommodations. And you would just maintain that year to year as you're having the annual IEP meetings. And not to write the accommodations in two places. We really want to avoid doing that. It's more work for you to write them in two places, to update them in two places. It makes it more likely that they'll get out of sync because you'll change the wording in one spot and forget to change it in another. And did I mention that it's just more work? So again, for those students with behavior needs, it's recommended to just keep their behavior accommodations in this BSP, maintain that, and then you would put any other accommodations, about math, reading, hearing, vision, motor skills, anything else in the accommodations section of the IEP. Okay, so when it comes to actually writing them, I mentioned that clarity and that who, what, where, when. As we are doing that in SpEd forms, there are drop downs with templates that just make our lives a lot easier. So we don't have to write these purely from scratch, which just would be very difficult. So the document that I opened from Case Manager Resources shows all of the examples, templates that we have in SpEd forms. So the purpose of this document is really just to make them easier to browse. So instead of going into a student's IEP and digging in and finding, the accommodations section every time you want to look at what some of those template options are, instead you can just open this document on CMR. So it's broken out into categories of functioning. And that kind of brings me back to the purpose of accommodations and modifications. Accessibility is what I said. Understanding what those barriers are that are going to be in front of this student because of their disability, and then removing those barriers. So there's a little bit of guiding questions about that in this document that I wanted to highlight. So in what areas of functioning does my student have an educational need? So it could be their math skills, could be their reading skills, could be cognitive, could be hearing, could be behavioral. So what areas of functioning does my student have an educational need? And the document is organized that way. Possible areas of educational need. How are those needs going to affect their ability to participate successfully in a variety of tasks and environments? So you've heard me use those words, environments and tasks, throughout this video already. So again, how does that disability, that educational need, impact them with different tasks and different environments? How can we support their access to those tasks and environments in the least restrictive manner possible? So those are our key questions in framing which accommodations does the student actually need, because we don't just pick willy-nilly, oh, this would make their day easier. It's not about that. We're not trying to just blindly make their day as easy as possible. And if the student doesn't like something, we just take it away and write it into the IEP. They won't have to do this anymore. That's not our legal objective, even when we're writing the IEP as the school team. Or the legal objective is what I've highlighted about understanding their disability and educational needs, the impact of those things, and then ameliorating those or diminishing those or removing those barriers and those impacts in the least restrictive manner possible. Okay, so enough about the purpose. Let's talk about actually writing it into the IEP. So on the IEP and SpEd forms, accommodations, modifications, and supports. And I'm going to, well, I'm showing you how to delete right now to remove some. So this is what the section would look like if you're writing a brand new IEP. So there's this accommodations, modifications, and supports piece. And we click add. And then we click this little arrow button to get our drop downs. So the really nice thing about these is that there are a lot of options in here. If you're looking for a particular thing, like let's try seating. Perfect, see right there? So it just pulls up the ones about seating for me. Let's try, oh, it went away. Try relationship. Okay, so we have ones that include relationships. So if you're ever looking for a specific thing, like I said, that's what that would be for. But otherwise, we should be looking at it through this, this lens of what are the educational needs. So there was those categories: fine and gross motor skills, functional academic skills, hearing and receptive language. So I'm going to give an example of worked examples for math. And then you might be wondering, should I be just putting them all in one box like this, multiple? No, we want to keep clicking add so that they're in different boxes. Let's say chunking work time. Okay, so I've added 2 just for the sake of this video's examples. Am I done? No, I'm not done. I want to individualize, make sure that the text here is actually accurate to the student and written the way that they need it. And then simple things like the names of classes I need to specify. So in general education math classes, is that the only place where the student needs it, or should I change this? Prior to each class period, so that's the when part. So we have the where, general education math classes, we have the when, and then who. So their teacher will modify their assignments and assessments to include worked examples that mimic each problem. So that's the what. So we have the where, when, who, and what. It's very clear. And then this is expanding on the what, so that the person actually knows what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, and if all this is accurate, then I would leave it, of course. But if it's not, I need to change it. All right, we are going to need to make some changes here. So chunking work time. So in math, social studies, science, reading classes. So there's the where. When instructing the student to complete a task, that's the when. Their teachers, that's the who, will chunk task expectations by clearly instructing the student to complete a specific amount of or time on a task. So that's the what. After the expectation is met, teachers will allow them a short break before moving on to the next chunk of the tasks. So again, I've made some adjustments. If I need to make more to make it accurate to the student and what the IEP team decided, then I would. But otherwise, I'm going to click Save. And that is, I mean, I would just keep clicking Add to add a third, a fourth. That's how you would add accommodations and modifications in the actual IEP. The last thing I want to talk about is I've been using this phrase, accommodations and modifications. And you might be thinking, is that just two synonyms? But they're different things. They both would be put into this same section of the IEP, but they're two different things. So accommodations change how a student learns the material. Modifications change what a student is taught or expected to learn. And then there are some examples right here below. So for accommodations on the left here, student might complete the same task as everybody else, but be given more time to complete it. So the task doesn't change. Student, when it comes to scheduling here, student might have more time to complete a project, or they might take a test over 2 days instead of 1. So, same thing, but just more time. They might be given a written list of instructions. So instead of just receiving their instructions orally from the teacher, they get a written list, and no other students would unless it was written into the IEP. Then there are modifications when we're actually changing the task. And I want to scroll down a little bit. We have a whole separate section here about modifications, and it's not crucial, that there's no spot in the IEP, just because it can be a little bit intimidating. There's no spot in the IEP where you have to say, oh, this is parallel participation, partial participation. No, the point is just to kind of open your brain up, if you've never considered this before, about how deep and how much you can modify in order to make the day accessible to the student. So parallel participation would be, for example, the student's worksheet is pre-modified to include all multiple choice items. So they're doing a worksheet when the other students in the classroom are doing a worksheet, but when the other students have to write long answers, written responses, your student is only going to be doing multiple choice items. So they need a separate worksheet. Or this is a common one I've seen, when there's a fill in the blank worksheet and students are supposed to go through the chapter and identify what the fill in the blanks are. Your student has page numbers written next to each blank so that they don't have to go through the whole chapter trying to find the answer. They go to one page and it's easier for them to find it. So parallel participation. Partial participation. For example, the student's assignment expectations are modified so that they only involve ideas and content rather than length or writing mechanics. So your student isn't being graded on their grammar or the length of content they write. They're only being judged on, did they include relevant ideas. So their whole assignment expectations can be different from all the other students in the room. For math, part of the problems could be done for the students so that they're only being graded on one small aspect of the math problem. So partial. And then there's completely alternative participation. So the rest of the class could be reading To Kill a Mockingbird in its original text, and your student could be reading a drastically shorter, summarized version of that text. Or the student could be in a social studies class and the other students are doing a complicated group project with an essay and a presentation about something geographic maps, and your student is sitting there coloring specific states and doing something much simpler and much different. So the point of this, again, is really drastic changes can happen. We can have entirely alternative assignments for the student in order to make the day accessible for them. So some of those examples I used in my head, I'm picturing a student with a low incidence cognitive disability, perhaps, who otherwise would be sitting in a separate special education classroom. But with these powerful modifications to the curriculum, they can be in a social studies gen ed classroom with their typically developing peers being included. They're just working on very different work from everyone else in the classroom. And that brings me to just the last thing I wanted to mention. I'm going to click the SpEd website here at the bottom of CMR. How would you execute those modifications? Those just don't come out of nowhere. We can't wave a magic wand and have modified materials and worksheets. So collaborative planning over in quick links here on the right. This is a way to request time, funded time to work with perhaps general education teachers on modifying curriculum. That's one of the most common reasons why these funds are used, this collaborative planning funds, to work on modifying curriculum materials so that they're accessible to the student. So essentially putting in the work to carry out these modifications. And that's it for accommodations modifications. Thank you so much.